Almost time to start.
We're in radio, 30 seconds is a long time.
Uh-huh. That's like a countdown. All right.
This is Words Aptly Spoken, which comes from Proverbs 25:11. A word fitly spoken is like apples of gold in settings of silver. The written word is a precious treasure. We want to preserve written knowledge for God's glory and as an anchor to the history of the church and its classical conversations. We hope to encourage the reading of words and of the word.
So welcome to Words Aptly Spoken, where Jennifer, Courtney, and I discuss a book each week from the Classical Conversations curated curriculum with you. This is a book club for lovers of the Word made flesh. It's Thursday, March 16th, 2023, and I'm Lee Bortons. This month's book club highlights resources for learning more about grammar and language. Tonight we'll be discussing The War Against Grammar by David Mulroy. Then we'll finish up the month with Teaching the Classics. And next week we'll have Andrew Adams, its author, on. And the following week we'll discuss Teaching, Writing, Structure, and Style with Andrew Pudua. If you missed any of our previous episodes, you can find them on Lee Bortons' YouTube channel. And to get there, you have to type in @Lee Bortons. I also host two other book clubs. I do host two. Now, to participate in my book club about nonfiction, please join me for Unfragmented with my co-host Kevin R. Novak. Unfragmented follows Words Aptly Spoken at 8 p.m. on Thursday nights. Kevin and I discuss a book a month rather than a book a week. And for those of you that are eager to see more of the unseen, join me and Kirsty Gilpin at 8 p.m. on Mondays for book discussions around the Math Map curriculum. So let's begin our discussion. And for those of you who might be new, the chat and the chat's at the bottom of the screen, and we're happy to see your beautiful face if you want to share that with us. So Jennifer, why don't you start?
Okay, so I have a question for everyone tonight. I want to know how many people were taught grammar before the age of 12?
So she wants me to answer first, and I had to think hard, and then memories came back to me. I had a very old second grade teacher. I had a very modern, hip first, and I had her again in third grade teacher. Mrs. Pedoto wore mini skirts. Mrs. Kessler wore long dresses. And I do remember Mrs. Kessler teaching us grammar, but not Mrs. Pedoto.
Yeah, it's funny how we associate those memories. I had this same old-fashioned teacher for first and third grade, and she was also my Sunday school teacher at church, and she was very old-fashioned and very strict, and I learned a lot from her.
That's good. Yes. Well, see, I only had it in second grade. I never had it again.
Yeah.
For the next 10 years of primary and secondary school, and never with my undergraduate or master's.
I never had it again, which I think is funny because I have a master's in literature and rhetoric. So that feels wrong. So do we have some book clubbers that want to share your grammar education experience?
Anyone?
How about you, Lynn? You'd like to talk? We're so glad you're here.
Oh, that's not a secret, is it?
No.
Okay, so if I had grammar, I did have grammar. It was Spanish grammar. I was in Paraguay.
Oh.
So no English, but Spanish. And I remember doing endings and things, but I don't know. I don't really remember very well. That was a long time ago.
I know.
One of my former students who had done, she started when Foundations and Essentials and then graduated through CC. And then she took a Spanish class at the local college, and she thought it would be like Essentials and like our Latin in CC community. And she called me and discussed the first, I think it was at the end of the first month. And she said, we are still learning words for items in the living room.
Oh, yeah.
Anyway.
Wow. Things have changed.
Mhm.
Well, if anybody else wants to hop in, they can chat and Julie will let us
I
know.
will.
Yeah, or even chat. I have no remembrance of ever doing it, like Lynn was kind of sharing there, or ever studying it. Okay, so how do you think that lack of grammar instruction affects our culture? I think we're going to find some ideas in the book that we're going to look at tonight. But before we jump in, how do you think it affects our culture? So the rest of you can think about that while Jennifer gathers her thoughts, and then we'll see what you guys say.
Yeah, so I was thinking about this the other day with my daughter who's in Challenge B. And I'm probably paying attention to this also because my college students will send me sentences that make no sense from their college course Canvas discussions. And but anyway, my younger one was reading Defeating Darwinism, and there are long arguments in there, and she's young. And whenever I would ask her to tell me back what Philip Johnson had just written, she would often tell me things she had heard at Sunday school. And I would say, that's all of what you just said is wonderful and true. And it's also not what Philip Johnson said. So I think that that's not just, a 14-year-old problem. I think we see that in our culture. And David Mulroy even talks about it in the book, that if you don't know grammar, you can't make sense out of the sentences you're reading. So.
Well, people would push back on that, Jennifer, and say, but I can. And I think you would then push back and say, well, you're probably not reading very difficult material.
That's probably true too. And some of it has to do with defining terms, which is, some people would argue that's not a grammar issue. I think probably most of us on the call would say that definitely belongs in the realm of grammar. So yeah, that's good.
How about you, Julie? What do you think the answer? Do you have any comments on how the lack of grammar instruction affects our culture now that you know what grammar is? Like, how can you even answer that question if you know what grammar is, right?
Exactly. I mean, I'm just thinking of how many people just are able to be steered in a direction of thought very quickly, and it's because they have nothing. They hear what they hear and just follow it, whether it's right or not. Now, whether that has to do with grammar, I mean, I think it does. I think when you have to understand words that people use and even beyond, when they say literacy, if we're talking about being literate, being able to take what is being said to another, well, where does that lead? And I think, not having the foundation of grammar doesn't allow us to become dialectic or rhetoricians of words. So, and it's able to steer a large crowd of people into the pit of despair, as they say in The Princess Bride. So
yeah, and we do, if we want to talk about the level of materials that you brought up, Lee, if we look at something like one of St. Paul's arguments in his letters in scripture, those are really long sentences. And so it really helps you to look for the subject and the verb so that you can figure out where his main argument is. There are a lot of dependent clauses hanging on every one of his sentences. And so it can be really hard to unravel, even scripture can be lost to us that way.
Yeah. I'm actually kind of afraid to read Lynn's because I might say a bad word because it's kind of a tongue twister. Say slipshod syntax has Sayers is what Lynn's response was.
One of my
Explain.
favorite sayings that she has, slipshod syntax. I'm like, what a fun phrase. Yeah.
Slipshod.
Do you remember what the context was for why she said that?
Oh, it was, we don't know how to fling our words back and defend ourselves. It's just a bunch of slipshod syntax or something about that. Yeah, because we didn't understand how to use words properly.
Yeah, one thing that set me on writing the essentials, besides my own children's need and my lack of understanding, was there was a Bible teacher at the church I was attending at the time, and he was going through one of Paul's arguments that Jennifer is referring to. And he kind of paused in the middle of the sentence that he was explaining. And he actually said, I think Paul got something wrong here because this doesn't make any sense. And he kept going. And I went, what?
Ah,
And it was a difficult sentence to read. And that was making me go, I don't want that to ever be the case for me.
Yeah.
So,
But isn't that what we do, right? It's hard, so we just skip it.
Yeah.
uh,
Right.
yeah.
so let me read an excerpt from this book that answers the question that Jennifer and I are asking about the lack of grammar. This is from page 114, and it's from a outside resource named Danielle Allen, where she was asked the same question. And she responded with this: learning grammar taught me how to think, to pay attention to the neat and precise relationship between things, to look for subtle differences, to grapple with complexity. I always felt as if a world of logic resided in my grammar lessons. And when I got to high school English classes, even classes on novels, plays, and short stories, I was leaps and bounds ahead of students who had never had the same chance to study grammar. So what do you think she means when grammar taught her to pay attention to the neat and precise relationship between things? How are we doing that in our essentials program?
Well, I was thinking one of my favorite homeschool memories from early on with Ben is that I was either sick or on a trip, and my mother went with him to Essentials for an afternoon. And she very quickly pulled out of her purse a notebook and a pen. And my mom is very old school, so she took her notes in shorthand. But she said, she got back and she called me and she said, that was the best 2 hours I've ever spent. I think I learned more grammar than I ever forgot from my own education. And she was like on a high, particularly about transitive verbs. And so it caused her to pay attention to the relationship between the actor and the recipient of the action. And she was just delighted to think about that relationship.
And so how would that also help us look for subtle differences? What do you think Diane means there?
I visited Essentials, I don't know, a couple of weeks ago, and it was so interesting. I'll probably botch what she said, but the tutor was trying to help the kids know when they use, in the diagramming, a line that goes straight and a line that goes slanted. And they had to keep repeating that. And so, I mean, who would pay attention to that except an Essentials tutor and classroom full of moms and kids, right?
Right.
But yeah.
Right. So that's a good example, Lynn, because there is a difference between the straight up and down line that's the direct object that receives the action of the verb, and the predicate nominative that's slanted back toward the subject because it's renaming the subject. So we're those
You sound
visuals.
just like her. Yes, that was perfect.
I'm tracking with you tonight, Lynn.
That's so good.
Good. So, well, I kind of hijacked Jennifer's questions for us because I really wanted to read this thing Danielle said, just that, because in classical conversations, we're always trying to get parents to not pay so much attention to the credit or to the content or saying I'm finished with something, that instead, what's that skill set that you get out of it? And so our study of grammar is helping them to grapple with complexities, notice subtle differences, and what was that first thing? Oh, the relationship and precision between things. So, so this is one of the reasons I love this book, is it's not just what David thinks, but he pulls in all kinds of quotes from all kinds of people. So Jennifer, take over. Okay.
Oh, sorry. I was going to say one of the differences that being an Essentials tutor for 6 years, the biggest impact in my scripture reading came from understanding imperatives and the implied you, and how we recognized and would actually put that in parentheses before the command, and when you cannot help but read scripture now and put you, before so many things. So I know for me that just little subtle difference of writing the word you in front of an imperative brings to life scripture in a way that wouldn't have happened if we didn't pay attention to that little detail.
Yeah, that's good, Julie. Mine was about pronouns, just that when you read particularly the King James, there's a lot of pronouns. And you can get lost really quickly if you don't know, if you're not paying attention and you don't know what the noun is to which that pronoun's replacing, you're going to be lost. And so mine was that thought of looking for what was replaced here. Otherwise, I don't know what's going on. So,
Well, I think a lot of bad doctrine comes out of that.
right.
Mm.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's good. Well, I'm going to read a quote from page 11, which is also one that is from another person. So this is from Omer Johnston, who is speaking about his experience teaching English in the Middle East. And so if you have your book, it's a long block quote, and I'm going to read the very bottom of it. But he says, one of the cultural problems of the English speaking world is that it is cut away from its sources, from the common experience of the English speaking peoples spanning some 7 centuries. That experience is contained for the most part in books, and most of those books are inaccessible to all but a fortunate few. And he says the reason is obvious to him why people got cut off. It's because they don't know their own language, and therefore they can't access the common experiences of their English speaking peoples. So what do you guys think about that? Is he right?
Can you say that again to let us think about it, but say it a little bit differently, or read it again?
Yeah, I will. One of the cultural problems of the English speaking world is that it is cut away from its sources, from the common experience of the English speaking peoples spanning some 7 centuries. That experience is contained for the most part in books, and most of those books are inaccessible to all but a fortunate few. And so he starts off by talking about the connection between grammar and literacy that we've been talking about.
So give us an example of a book that's probably inaccessible to people now that was maybe commonly read in another era.
Well, the first thing that came to my mind was Shakespeare,
Mm-hmm.
because I'm tutoring Challenge 3 again this year, and it's hard work. It feels like reading a foreign language sometimes for the students. But what's interesting that I find with our Challenge 3 students is it really only takes them one play to get their feet under them. The first play is usually kind of murky, but then they get a sense because they have been immersed in both English in essentials and Latin in the grammar strand. They do have a facility with words, and they've just done a lot of reading of British literature the year before. And so that allows them to gain a foothold. So yeah, they don't have the same gaps that maybe other people have in trying to do that.
So just an aside, Andrew Castle, who works with Classical Conversations, was one of my first students, and he came into Challenge 3 one week and said, my SAT literature, or verbal section went up 100 points. And I said, why do you think that happened? Did you study? Did you go to some program? What happened? And he said, I think it's because we were reading Shakespeare and I knew what the words were this time.
Yeah. Yeah, when Tim and I were traveling, Tim is my husband, we got to go to the house of Dr. Johnson, who was sort of this 18th century wit in London. And he wrote the first dictionary of the English language, and something like 80%. So he tried to trace the words back to the first time they were used in English and give them their cultural roots. And something like 80% of the entries he traces back to Shakespeare. So
I'm surprised it's that many, because I would think a bigger percent would have been to the Bible. Oh, is it because the English translation of the Bible was from all in that time too?
Well, that's probably true. And he may have had a bias toward looking in Shakespeare. And Shakespeare did make up a lot of words. So a large volume of the words that were in the dictionary would have appeared first in Shakespeare since he made them up.
So do any of our clubbers have an example of a book that they were frustrated by because they thought they should be able to read it and were not able to? Or
I remember the Federalist Papers, when I first came across those, I was so frustrated that I didn't understand the vocabulary that during that era a common man would. And that just showed me the loss of language we had over those span of years. Yeah. I had similar feeling the first time we tried to read it with our older two. I was mad because the other thing is I was a voracious reader and I thought I had pretty extensive vocabulary.
And it turned out I really didn't. I was a voracious reader of things that were more recent. How about you guys? Yeah, Lynn, tell us that
Yeah.
for the
I was
record.
thinking like Milton's Paradise Lost. I love when I just got to read, the first time we read it, we read just the headings, right, over the poem, and I understood it. And then I tried to read the poem, and I was like, I did not know what I was reading. But it's beautiful, but yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. He's part of that, I think, besides the difficulty of Milton's language, is also that he has a lot of allusions that we don't know, even biblical allusions. I took a class with an unbelieving professor in college but he loved Milton, and we did a whole semester of Milton. And one day he just stopped and he closed his book. It was one of those moments, a hush fell over the room. We knew we were in trouble. And he said, I am an avowed atheist, and I know more about the Old Testament scriptures than everyone in this room in the Bible Belt. Go home and read Job, and then come back in 2 days. So.
Okay. So you had some other quotes for us. You want to move on, or is that okay, everyone?
Did you want to do this question on the screen? So do you think we are being cut off from the Bible? That was the next thing on our question.
Sure. You want to talk about that one, Jennifer, or do you just want us to answer that?
Yeah, you guys I kind of shared one example of my pronouns.
Mhm.
One that I have is some of the colloquial. Oh, who was there?
I was just saying, when I was off of Jennifer's pronouns, I'm thinking, well, there is scripture even changing pronouns again on purpose. And I don't know what they're going to do with pronouns now in scripture. It could be awful.
Well, we'll just have to pray, and we have to memorize really good old versions so that whatever happens, we still retain the closer to the original. I don't know Aramaic, but it's a little bit better. Yeah, there's a lot of colloquialisms, like, by the skin of your teeth. I don't think people know what that means anymore. Fat souls. There's, just phrases that are in there that you'd read them and go, oh, I've never heard that before.
I brought a bunch of those to Challenge 3 one day and made them our topics for an impromptu practice, because we were going to do our impromptu on American history the following week. And I thought, well, I'll give them something easy to practice with just for fun the week before. We'll just take a few minutes. And it was a great idea, except that they didn't know what the idioms meant. It's pretty hard to give an impromptu speech if you don't know what your English idioms mean. So it didn't work out very well, but
I hadn't heard of them.
Yeah.
Were you able to explain it to them? Like, did you have the right imagery for them?
Yes, we were able to. It didn't happen all at once. I think they were not wanting to admit it, and they were trying to cope and silently prepare, because you only get a few minutes to prepare for your impromptu. And then they started coming up to me one by one going, I don't know what this means, not to put all your eggs in one basket. And so then I would explain. So,
or a stitch in time saves 9.
Yep.
I have been, I think the Bible, I mean, shame on me if I read King James. I always feel like I need to read it somewhere else too. Like I can't, but we have water. I mean, it's just, you can see kind of the progression of these Bible versions that come out. And so, King James, that should, I mean, I don't know why in my mind, I think that's probably the most difficult to read, but there's probably something harder. But then you hear somebody quote from the Message, and I'm like, so I get frustrated at that. Like, you've watered it so down that you kind of lose this reverence or this holiness of, this is Jesus himself, that you're, hey, bro, I don't know. There's just something where we feel like, I just think in culture, we feel like, people can't pay attention for longer than 1 minute because of all of these things that have happened, that we don't sit down and wrestle with hard words and hard things. And then, you just have a version of scripture that, might be fun in a play or I don't know. I just, it's a little frustrating on both ends. Like, I don't want to read the King James because I don't want to struggle that much, so what is that beautiful ESV is where I've landed, but I'm open to King James.
You keep reading the SV and the King James will get easier.
Yeah,
right?
I think so.
Start one's familiar.
Yeah, that's right.
Mhm.
That's right.
It'll be okay. Okay. Anybody else want to add before Julie goes to our next question?
I think the thing that brought more understanding and depth of understanding of scripture for me was the understanding of verbs and the tense, and whether it was an action that was completed or a continuing action or future. It just brought a better understanding of what, promises or prophecy or things that are finished. And that I loved. Essentials helped me understand that. Yeah. Better.
Well, that's good.
Yeah, my students have talked about that too, Sherry, especially when we're looking at the scriptures in Latin, about that idea that they're seeing a lot of the future tense because only Jesus can speak of the future and have those propositions be true. And they had never seen future tense Latin, even though they memorized it, they had never really seen it. And so that they noticed that too, that those verb tenses really matter in scripture. Yeah.
It's interesting because with the science being so reverent as an idol in this era, scientists are always looking backwards because they're trying to verify information. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's great to have an accurate record and analysis of what's happening. But so someone who kind of speaks scientism would have more past tense versus someone that's really great about those who have access to the scriptures, as you can get both.
Yeah.
I have had my twins and a couple of their CC classmates a couple of days a week in the mornings, and we've been doing our Bible readings. And so it goes from, we do a psalm, something in the Psalms, Old Testament and New Testament, and inevitably somebody has a different translation Bible. And we have started just popcorning around all the different translations. And it's been fascinating for the kids to start to realize how translations do use different adjectives or verbs and with the differences, if it's a New King James or an ESV or the NLT, NIV, and they get more depth out of it just by having 4 or 5 different translations, and then seeing the simplicity of some of the versions, the more complexity of of different versions.
So is that Michelle?
Yes.
Yeah. So I wonder if what you just said would feel true if you had been unable to make comparisons. So one of the things that's been lost in our culture is what is called proficient literacy, where you take a variety of resources and compare them to each other. And so the fact that you were even able to do that is kudos to you, and what a great modeling for the kids. So thanks for that example.
I was thinking that too, just that the model that you're setting for them is that these ideas are important enough for them to slow down and listen to them in multiple ways, and not just be concerned about covering a certain quantity, but really paying attention to where you are and looking at it in a number of ways. So that's a gift.
It's been even good for me.
Yeah. That's always true. Homeschooling is really for us. It's the secret.
No, but I mean, we've just been able to, even because they're all challenge students. So they're all in different stages of learning Latin. And I know my kids and I, when we first started in Challenge A, we would get so frustrated because when we would translate a sentence, our translation didn't necessarily meet whatever the answer key was. And the more we do it now, I realize that as long as we're getting that exact same meaning as to what the answer key was saying, then I don't, we don't get as worried about it anymore. Whether, I can't give you an example right now, but when I mentioned that to the kids, I said, you can see how in this particular sentence in the verse in ESV compared to the NIV or NLT, that's probably a little more simpler than the NIV, it's still saying the exact same thing. And it was like this sense of relief for all of us too.
I want to read a quote that what you just said remind me of from the Mulroy book. And these are his words actually on page 106. He makes the comment that there's an absurdity of applying content and performance standards to the language arts that's most apparent in the study of literature. And when you guys are translating Latin, you are studying literature, right? You're going really deep in the word and the structure besides its meaning in the translation. So I think you gave a perfect example of how there's not really a single performance standard because there's so many ways to translate it. And what we tend to do in modern education is almost treat everything like it's a math class of arithmetic where there's always the same answer.
Yeah.
Instead of accepting that, okay, that was different. Let's move to the next one and see what we get.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. I could go down a little digression about the liberal arts department gave away their, in the universities gave away their domain, doing just what you described, because they were clamoring to be like the math department so that they could get Department of Defense funds during the space race. And when they did that, they lost their sense of purpose of shaping culture and giving voice to human experiences and, enlarging the soul. So they kind of lost their way.
So what you got next, Julie or Jennifer? Because I found a game in the book that we could play, but I want to see your questions too.
Well, I'm intrigued by the game, so I don't know. Do I want to?
I know. I'm all for a game.
I know.
That's
I
the
kind of
only
want to give
reason-
up my questions in
That's
favor
the only
of
reason
playing a
I taught
game.
essentials was to play
know.
math games.
So it sounds like the game, Lee.
Yeah, we kind of answered the question on the screen now about have you seen the
Mhm.
loss of the ability to read by listing a few books and ideas that have separated us because of grammar.
Mhm. Yeah.
Okay, so if you have the book, it's on page 89.
89, okay.
And I know all of you don't, so I'll go slow. Basically, it's a challenge to take kernel sentences, just basic sentences, and combine them. So we'll do 2 sentences first to combine, and then we'll add one more. If you want, write them down. So the first one is generals took control of Turkey. And the second one is generals took control in a coup. So make that into one sentence. Generals took control of Turkey. Generals took control in a coup. Who's going?
Ooh. Generals, comma, in a coup took control of Turkey.
Okay. Jennifer's got.
Oh, I just put the 2 in the chat box just so that
I
they
saw.
could see them. Yeah.
Okay.
So you could rearrange Julie's and say in a coup, comma, generals took control of Turkey.
So
I cheated, Julie. I used yours.
That's okay. Yours makes more sense.
So I think if you're a voracious reader, you could do what Julie did without knowing why you did it or how you did it, because it's still a pretty simple sentence. And let's add one more sentence. The coup was swift.
Can we change it? Can we make it took control swiftly, or you can't change it?
You can change it, or you can rearrange the sentence Julie had and come up with a new one altogether, whatever you want. But took control swiftly, is that what you said?
Yeah, that's how I would put the swift in there.
Swiftly.
Control. I don't know.
Swiftly. Yeah.
I was just going to add it to the one I built off of Julie's, which was in a
Swiftly.
swift coup, generals took control.
But was
Okay,
was the coup swift, or did the generals work swiftly.
Well, that's a good question, isn't it?
Swiftly.
So we each used
The
swift
coups
for
general.
a different word. Yeah.
So I think that what you just said goes back to that quotation that Lee read from Danielle, where she was talking about the complexities and the subtleties, right?
You just did that.
Yeah.
And it takes me back to what we do in the quid et quo for essentials. And, you know, I have not taught essentials in 10 years, but I remember, you know, rearranging the sentences to may have a different purpose and ending. It's such a easy exercise to do, but it does give us, I mean, that's exactly why I could do what we did. Because I remember doing that and made it a
Glad.
habit.
And
Yes.
yeah, and also probably because you were tutoring it, and we find that when we have to teach something, we have to think
Yes.
about it more and we get better at it, right?
Yes. Yes.
So the next one is the coup was bloodless.
Mm.
I'm seeing a bunch of chats, Julie. Is some other
That's
folks
me.
answering?
It's me
Oh,
putting
yeah,
this
she's just, yeah.
in so that they can see them.
All right, someone else do it. Jessica, are you brave?
How about you, Sherry? I can see your face. I'm calling you.
Well, I had through a swift bloodless coup, generals took control of Turkey.
Wow.
I forgot Turkey. Yeah.
Okay, you ready? This is longer. The coup sent personal carriers sweeping through the cities. The coup sent I'm sorry, I said that wrong. The coup sent personnel carriers, in other words, some sort of truck, sweeping through the cities.
The coup sent them,
That's what it says, the coup sent.
not the generals.
Well, that's, I think, what they want you to say, right?
Yeah.
The generals of the coup sent personnel carriers sweeping through the
Swiftly.
cities.
Swiftly sweeping.
They got some alliteration in there.
Uh-huh.
I
Mhm.
like
I
it.
mean, all of this
Okay.
IEW stuff is coming
One
back.
Or sent
more.
swift personnel carriers through the city.
Yes.
Yeah, we kind of need to know which thing was swift, don't we?
Well, it says
Uh-huh.
it's the
The
coup,
coup.
but
Yeah,
I'm
the
letting,
coup.
I'm letting Lynn have fun. It doesn't matter. There's no right
No,
answers.
I'm making it into a
Just
equation, a
playing,
math
yeah.
equation. It equals swift.
Mhm.
And
Okay,
I'm
how
hearing
about-
this whole thing in Tom Brokaw's voice. So
Okay, now
Sorry.
we're gonna add the cities were major.
Oh,
ooh,
oh, that's easy.
okay.
Just,
I'm putting it in for you guys so you can have all of them together.
oh, man.
You could just do your last sentence, Jennifer, and put major
So
before
it's
city.
major cities, the major
Okay,
cities.
so then where were we?
Swiftly
In a
Swept.
swift bloodless coup. I'm trying to put you guys together what you just said in the chat box. The generals took control of Turkey. Oh, where do you want me to put the personnel carriers though? Oh, how about this?
What you got?
I'm putting it in the chat box because it's so long.
We have to
I have
read
to
it.
see it.
Mm-hmm.
You mean you can't hold it always in your head? You have to show the steps and write things out?
Right.
I do, but you know who could hold it in their head? And I've always been jealous of this. When you read Little Town on the Prairie and those students,
Hmm.
those young students were parsing all those sentences and doing all that calculation in their head. I'm very jealous that I grew up with so much paper and they had to just keep it all in their
Remember?
heads. Yeah.
Mhm.
All right. So what I said was, and I don't know if I got it all, so you guys check me. In a swift, bloodless coup, which sent personnel carriers sweeping through the major cities, the generals took control of Turkey.
That sounds amazing.
It does. Nicely done.
All right, one more and we're done with the game. You ready? The personnel carriers were armored.
Oh. Well, just that which sent armored personnel
Armored.
carriers sweeping through the city, major cities. Yes, okay.
All right.
That's
So
a good
not
one.
only is that kind of thing in this book, but I don't know if you can see my screen or not. If you look at page 91, oh, I have this dumb background thing on. I'm gonna turn it off.
Do you want me to show it?
Yeah, you show. Can you see it all? Yeah, it has diagramming sentences too. So it's got some philosophy of language. It's got some interesting facts about the history of language, foreign language, some games, some diagramming, some student reactions. There's some noun and well, parts of speech activities. So the book is a little bit of a hard read. Like, why would I say that, Jennifer? What am I thinking of when I say it's a hard read?
Well, he has a lot of purposes, and so it kind of takes you a hard time to get into the rhythm. There's
And
a
was she
long
from
history
20 years
of how
ago?
the
I think I've heard about it before, but felt I was not qualified or
No one's
know
having
who's some
fun.
wasn't good enough to do it, you know. But I didn't investigate to see what it was like. So.
So directing your first time. I know. So how did you ultimately decide, like, here we go, we're gonna do this?
Well, I'm a single mom, and so
What
and I
is
work
that?
a full-time and a
I
part-time
don't actually
job,
know what it is.
and Was
It sounds
doing
like Becky
a
DePiero.
It is Becky
typical
DePiero, but I don't know where
co-op.
it's coming from.
Okay, somehow it's
You know,
playing on
very
my screen. Hold on,
segmented. It was
I gotta
before
turn
you
it.
had been involved with it for many years. But a dear friend has been
That is
engaged
so
for many
creepy.
years,
We're listening in on someone
she's
else's
like, well,
party at
come
their
try this.
home.
And she's got a daughter that's in the same
It
level
sounds
as
to
my
me like there's
daughter.
an open tab on
And
a browser.
Basically,
and
Yes,
started
I'm
to
trying to
play
find
video.
it, and you know how it is.
Home all day alone.
It's a
could
recording,
go
so
with-
I need to just find it.
Okay, good. I was like,
could go to their
I don't
house
want that kind of
and sport
power.
with them. And so my friend would be there to kind of help guide them, and then she had
Haha, there it was.
Oh, my
so what were
word.
you saying?
I'm-
Oh yeah, about
well-
why the book can feel difficult.
I just kind of I sucked into the world of the Waltons and the party line
Mhm.
through the telephone exchange. But anyway, all right, I digress. I'm having lots of weird memories tonight. He just tries to do a lot of things. So he tries to show the problem with the lack of grammar instruction. And then he gives a history of the 7 liberal arts and a history of how we got our parts of speech. And then he gives some remedies, but along the way, he also, quotes from National Councils of Teachers of English and things. So it's just, you have to just kind of stick with him through a lot of different topics, I think.
Yeah. And what I think that we did tonight, I think was successful. I've really enjoyed this conversation with you guys is we took the war on grammar or the war against grammar. Who in the world wants to read that in the first place? And it is a little bit of a difficult book. It's also an expensive book. I want you to know, I admit that. But I think why we were able to be successful is we took a few quotes and we took a few passages and we took a few activities. And we didn't do it in order. We didn't turn one page and then do the next, that we used the book rather than book using us.
Mhm.
And that's, I think, an important lesson for the classical community to learn that it's okay to do that.
Yeah.
Okay, we just
Thanks
got a
for
few minutes
playing with
left.
us.
Yes, it was very fun.
That was very fun. Do you want me to read our closing quote?
Yes,
Sure.
please.
Okay, it's on page 51. And this is Cicero. Mulroy is quoting Cicero, and he's talking about how students need to know enough grammar, or any student of any age needs to know enough grammar to engage with the literary classics. And I just love what he said about reading. Other diversions do not belong to all times, all ages, all places. Literary studies sharpen the minds of youth, entertain the elderly, glorify successes, offer refuge and comfort in adversity, give delight at home, are no impediment in society, stay with us through sleepless nights on foreign journeys in the lonely countryside. I just thought that was a lovely sentiment for the importance of grammar.
So
So it's-
tell us, so Cicero was from when and from where? Tell us.
Rome, 1st century AD. All right.
Okay.
Yep.
So we don't think much about that time period as there being literature and books and things to study that people didn't have them. And this makes me think that's probably a progressive chronological snobbery to think we have more than they had. Did they have
Yeah.
lots of books?
Well, they would have had the Greek classics.
But no printing press, right? So that made me think, what kind of books? And probably were rare. Like you didn't have like
Yeah.
copies of them. I don't know. Like,
So
'cause
a
there
lot
were
of them
books
would
of-
have had to be oral, right? They would have had to be shared
Mm.
orally.
Mhm.
So you think when he's saying literary studies, he could possibly mean the oral traditions, not necessarily the written traditions?
Yeah, I mean, I think he would have to, well, either he's talking about a very small number of people, which is possible, or he would have to be including oral understandings of stories and going to plays and things like that.
What if our understanding of the science of the air is wrong and books were more ubiquitous than we imagine? Why do we think they weren't all over the place? When we read something like this, it makes me go, huh?
I know.
Well, I'm thinking they were probably very expensive, right? Because what were books would have been written on? They didn't, I don't know when paper, like there was no printing press, right? So like how would they would have had to have handwritten them. So I don't think that they were plentiful, but I
Yeah.
think they were there. But I just don't think, and I don't know who could read. Would everybody be able to read?
I think these are good questions for us to ask and investigate. They'd
Yeah.
be really good leading questions for our challenge students to research and write about. Because I think a lot of times we make assumptions about antiquity that just aren't true. So
Mm.
for instance, Abraham in the time of at Ur in the time of Abraham, they have found stone tablets that
Mhm.
have calculus on them. Right. So we found stone tablets because that's what would last 3,000 years.
Right.
That doesn't mean there wasn't papyrus and paper versions.
Right.
I think there
Well,
was
because-
vellum, right? The animal skin.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Mhm.
Yeah. I'm not saying they were easy or cheap. I'm just wondering, is our image of what it was like really accurate or not?
Yeah, that's a good question.
Mhm.
And I was thinking, would you only, I mean, I'm thinking of the time of Rome since we were talking about Cicero, but my understanding was education was only for young men of a certain, like a property owner young man, not a slave owner or a girl. I'm thinking.
Yeah. What? An education meaning going to school or education? 'Cause you
Well,
have to go to
as in
school to get-
reading and writing. I don't know. I'm trying to think of what I remember about that and who could have access. And maybe I'm just assuming things and I don't really know.
It's an interesting question because I think we have lots of examples of people who self-educated anyway, or who snuck
Yeah.
around learning what their brothers were learning, or right, or what their masters were learning, or whatever.
Mhm.
Okay, that sounds like another topic because we're out of time.
I
Thank
know,
you
we
so
are.
much, everyone, for coming. It was a great conversation, and I'll see you next week.
Thanks, guys.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Bye.